Good morning, everyone. Welcome to ACDE number 186. Bunch of things to talk about today. I think the most important thing is making sure everyone is aligned on the Devnet 0 specs. I believe they're now frozen, but there's been some EL discussion on the CL call last week and then a couple tweaks since the last call. So yeah, just want to make sure we're all on the same page about the scope for Devnet 0 so teams can continue working on that. Then 3074, I think Nethermind had some behavior that they wanted to clarify, and then there were a bunch of proposals for tweaks to the EIPs, so I think we should discuss those, probably in the context of like future DevNets rather than changing the DevNet 0 spec. And then after that, there's a bunch of other EIPs that people have wanted to propose for Pectra. It might make sense to go over them, but also just to hear from client teams how we want to proceed, given we still have a lot of stuff to implement. So we might not want to like commit to even more stuff right now. And then if we have time to get to this, there were some questions in the agenda about how we want to think through the L1, L2 governance separation and how things like RIPs and EIPs should interact and whatnot. So yeah, we can leave this for the end. But I guess just to kick it off, the teams want to give a quick update with regards to where they are on DevNet 0. I know we have the implementation tracker, but yeah, any team want to share sort of where they're at now, any blockers that they have, or yeah, the floor is yours.
So I can start on Nethermind side. Yeah. I think we can say that we are almost ready for DevNet because we have all drafts implementation of all EIPs. And we are right now polishing them, writing some tests, but of course there are some things that are easier to test on DevNet. So there might be hiccups, but it's better to try sooner than later.
Nice. Any other team?
Yeah, basic can go. Similar situation. We have everything in progress. 2537 is done. 6110 and 7002 are done, pending some revision to adopt the 7685 mechanism to wrap them up. So that's the same status as last week from the consensus layer. And I think that's about it. Auth and auth call are in progress.
Sweet.
So we are anticipating participating with all that stuff in DevNet 0.
Very cool. Anyone from Guest, Aragon, other teams?
Well, for Aragon, we started looking at most of the EIPs, but and we've implemented the BLS precompiles one, but I'm not sure because that will be ready for DevNet 0 because it's far from being complete, the implementation, and also we're in the middle of a big change. We are switching internally to the Aragon 3 branch, which has been in the works for years now. Yeah, so we might get slowed down because of that, but it's a big move for us.
Got it. And I guess your expectation is that Pectra will ship on Aragon 3, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Got it. Sweet. Anyone from Geth?
Yeah, we're in pretty good shape. We have 6110, 7002 implemented using requests. 2537 is merged. I'm not sure, Marius, if the subgroup checks were merged yet, but we have those updated. And 3074 is still in progress. but in general, we're days away from being ready for DevNet 0.
Nice.
2135 is also ready.
Right, 2935 is also ready.
Sweet. I don't know if there's anyone from Ethereum JS as well.
Yeah, I think most of the things are ready. We just need to integrate 7685 and we should be good to go.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess, maybe let's talk about 7685, given that seems to be a common thing across different teams. Matt, I know you followed up with all of the teams over the past couple weeks. Oh, Antonio, we can do the subgroup stuff after if that's what your hand is for. But yeah, let's do the message bus. Do you have a feeling for whether everyone is on board with this? Is there any team that basically had concerns or issues?
It seemed like most teams were on board. If anyone has complaints or questions, maybe we can surface those now.
Okay, so any objections to the generalized message bus? If not, then I think this is something that makes sense to include as part of Devnet 0, given it's a relatively small change and sort of is pretty fundamental to how we build a bunch of EIPs, and we don't want to have like a version that doesn't use it. I know you had some PRs, 2, 6, 1, 110, and 702 that based on this, I believe those have already been merged, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So then, given that like effectively the spec already uses this, we can just add the CIP to the list that's included in Pectra and part of DevNet 0 and continue with the PRs. Continue with 6110 and 702 based on the latest PRs. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay, no objections. And I missed REST in the updates before. I don't know if there's anyone from REST who wants to give a quick update. Okay, if not, we can move on. Antonio, Mario, yeah?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick update on tests, if that's okay, or
Yeah,
all
please
right.
do.
So yeah, we have a very good set of tests for the BLS precompile and also for 6110. Those are basically done. I think 7002 tests will be done probably today if everything goes fine. Remaining is the 2935. We don't have tests for that, but I think they will be done this or next week, probably. And when that is done, we will make a release with all the fixtures so the teams can consume them, and also verify any bugs before Devnet.
Nice. Thank you. And Antonio, you had your hand up, I believe, about the BLS EIP.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, just want to make people aware that basically like the 2527 has been stable like for years, but has been a kind of addition that is non-trivial in the last week. So basically, we now require subgroup checks for all the operation but add. So in case people want to update their implementation, this is the right time to do it. And there is a bunch of test vectors that has been added as well that cover all the corner cases, including these subgroup checks that are mandatory now. Just this like announcement. I don't have anything else.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think we had your last commit in the spec for DevNet 0, but if you have a chance, can you just put the PR to commit in the chat so everybody can reference it?
Sure, I'll do it right now.
Thank you very much. Sweet. So, okay, there's some comments in the chat about when DevNet 0 with different dates. I don't know if like it actually makes that much sense to set a date here. Like if the earliest is going to be, sometime next week, but I think we can probably coordinate this offline as client implementations start to be ready, and maybe have like a bit more of a discussion on like having more clients join next week. Yeah, I don't know. Does anyone see a strong need to like set a target date right now? It seems like we can just keep working on the implementations and launch it whenever it's ready. Okay, I have one yes in the chat. Okay, let's do that then. And I think, yeah, also based on like Mario's comments earlier, like once we have test vectors as well for more of the EIPs, then it's valuable for clients to actually run through those, make sure that we're passing everything and not just launch a Devnet where we find bugs that the static tests could have caught. But yeah. Yeah, anything else on Devnet 0? Oh, Xiaowei, yeah. Yeah, you want to talk about the bug?
Yes. Yeah, so just before this call, Dustin, he found the test vector error of the consolidation. So we will fix it, and I think the error is just in the test vectors. So we will cut a new release soon to address it. And also we will include the peer death new test
Nice.
on it, and also extra Electra test. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. So yeah, and to be clear, the specs themselves should not change. It's really just the tests for all those things, right?
Yes, no substantive change to the Electra part.
Got it. Okay, anything else on Devnet 0? Can we get an EL test release or at least field test before Devnet? So Mario said they're planning a release for next week, but targeting BLS 611070222935. I think that's everything on the EL side. Mario, will the release from next week basically target all the EIPs from Devnet zeros, or is there? Oh, I guess maybe auth call is not included.
Yeah, maybe probably odd call is gonna be, but the ones that we are trying to aim for the release are the ones that are like absolutely necessary. For example, the 7002 and 6110, they have changes to the header.
Yeah.
So for the exception of 3074, as long as we don't call the opcode, the tests
right.
will work. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we'll try to get test vectors for everything but auth call next week, and then we can add test vectors for 3074 after.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Sweet. Anything else on Devnet 0? Okay. So 3074, there was a comment by Nethermine about clarifying some behavior, and then a bunch of requests for changes from different developers. So I think it makes sense to first address the Nethermine concern, and then we can maybe go over the other sort of proposals for it. Who was it from Nethermind?
It was me.
Yes, please.
So it's I think I have said it in the GitHub issue. It's basically delegate call before auth call, not the other way around.
Okay.
So apologies for that. So basically the idea was that currently auth call only works for the authorized invoker, and the invoker cannot be some kind of a proxy contract that can delegate the authorization to another implementation. I was thinking that this will prevent certain use cases from emerging, and maybe we should look at it in a different perspective. There is some suggestions to do it in another way. So instead of allowing delegate auth call after delegate call, I think Light Client told me that he's thinking about an approach where we initialize the invoker contract inside the frame of the EOA. Light Client, if you care to elaborate.
I've sent this around in a couple places, but I guess the TLDR is one idea that I'm thinking about is to possibly change the behavior of auth call so that instead of just modifying the message.sender, so in the next frame you call like exactly the target that the EOA wanted to call, you actually call into some target code that was signed over in auth similar to the EOA. I think there's a lot more ability to reuse existing smart account code in this type of format. So it's something I want to look into. I'm generally feel okay about allowing delegate call in 3074 in this format or just allowing it in the currently specified format. But I'm not sure that there's going to be much change in 3074 for the next month or so as we're working on Devnet 0. I would just like these conversations to continue happening and maybe have some sort of concrete proposal of change in 1 month's time.
Yeah, so there's a comment by Ansgar saying, this feels like a rather big change. I guess talking about big changes to 3074, does it make sense to cover the other proposals and sort of see where we stand after that? Or do people have comments or thoughts? Okay, have a +1 for the other proposals. So the other one, who was the first one that posted about this on the chat? So Derek, I don't know if you're on the call, Derek Chang.
Yep, I'm here.
Yes,
Yep.
do you want to talk through your proposal?
Sure, yeah. So the proposal was actually first proposed by Anchor from Biconomy, which I think who I think is also here, but basically like the idea is that so basically like right now it seems that there are two different needs when it comes to the nonce parts of the auth message, right? So basically like one group of people wants a in protocol way to revoke nonce messages. So like in particular, I think they want to be able to revoke auth messages in a way that is independent of the invoker implementation, right? So I think the concern here is that if the invoker is like buggy or malicious, there should still be a way for the user to revoke messages. And then there's like another group of people who have a lot of problem with the fact that by including the nonce into the auth message, every time you send a transaction from your EOA, you are revoking all outstanding auth messages, right? So the issue here is that so for example, so for my company, ZeroDev, so we are building a account abstraction based embedded wallet, right? So some of the most popular use cases involve long-standing authorizations, right? So for example, session keys. The idea that you can attach a temporary key to your smart accounts and then basically like have other people send transactions for you. So if we were to implement that on top of 3074, that would depend on a long-lived auth message, right? And really like any other use cases, such as like for example like attaching a passkey to your smart accounts, that will also depend on that, right? So the fact that like every time you send a message from your EOA, you're killing all long-lived auth messages, I think will be like a really, really big issue for this, I guess like smart account use cases. So the proposal that Anchor and I wanted to propose is essentially so I think I will probably send put a link here, but basically I'll just put a link in the chat before I right here, yeah. So basically this is the idea, and then you can see my reply to this message like right below this message, right? So basically the TLDR is that we changed the nonce parts of the spec. So sorry, like the nonce part of the auth message to two things, which is nonce manager address and nonce manager nonce. So the nonce manager can be any address. So it can be a EOA or it can be a smart account, right? Sorry, like a EOA or a smart contract, right? So the most basic way to use this would be to set a nonce manager to your own EOA, in which case you get the exact same behavior as today, right? In which, like, if you send a transaction from your EOA, you are revoking all messages. But this also gives you the ability to essentially use another contract, or like another EOA or another contract as your nonce manager. So for example, I think like one very powerful way to do this is to use a counterfactually deployed contract as your nonce manager. So this counterfactually and deterministically deployed contract will be essentially owned by your EOA, right? So you don't actually have to deploy this contract to have a nonce manager. So you can specify this contract address as your nonce manager, and then like when you actually need to revoke a message, you actually deploy this contract and you increment its nonce, right? In order to revoke messages. But this means that, first of all, you don't have to pay any cost to have a nonce manager. But then secondly, like it gives you the ability to both revoke auth messages out of protocol, so not out of protocol, but just like independently of invokers, but also it doesn't mess with the fact that you can, just like use your EOA without accidentally revoking all outstanding auth messages. Yeah, so basically this is a proposal to meet both needs. One's the need to be able to revoke auth messages independently of invokers, and the second need, that is the ability to use your EOAs without accidentally like revoking all outstanding auth messages. Yeah, that's a TLDR.
Got it. Thanks. Ansgar, I believe you have a response to that.
I just would say, I mean, I think it's an interesting proposal, but the way I think about 3074 is our goal was really to basically, because the nature of invokers is so unusual, because you can't just have arbitrary invokers, but every individual invoker has to be manually whitelisted by the wallet, which means we only end up with, every wallet will only end up supporting 2, 3, 4 kind of community-wide big kind of standardized invokers. And because of that, we have like much better trust guarantees about these invokers. And so it makes a lot of sense to try to delegate a lot of special purpose logic to the realm of the invoker. So for example, in this case, you can get the exact same behavior by just making the kind of the in-protocol nonce checks slightly more permissive. So you could, for example, basically, or it is very similar functionality, where basically you just, in protocol, instead of always enforcing the nonce restriction, you can basically make it optional. You can say if you sign over the 0 nonce, basically it means now the nonce is non-binding. And then we could basically, instead of this being an enshrined part of 3074, it could just be an ERC. So there's an ERC for, if invokers want, they can opt into a nonce manager pattern. And then we could basically just on the social layer enforce that, hey, wallets should only whitelist invokers that follow this nonce manager pattern if we think it's a useful pattern, right? And because, again, like wallets will only, there will be like 3 or 4 really, really popular kind of ecosystem-wide invokers, like a batching invoker, like whatever, right? So we can just basically pick whatever community standard we like. The big advantage of this is that instead of having to make a hasty choice now, which constrains functionality forever and is very, very basically opinionated about the choice, we delegate it to the ERC layer, where we basically then can take the proper time for the next 1, 2, 3 years, figure out what is the best patterns there are, and then all come together around those features. So I personally be very, very strongly opposed to enshrining special purpose functionality like that directly into the opcode itself.
But just making sure I understand. So like, are you proposing that we just remove nonce altogether from the auth message, or?
You could, so yeah, to flesh that out. So basically what you could do is you could say that you say if the nonce is 0, basically it's not binding in the message. If it's not 0, it's binding. What that means is that by default, the signer can choose, right? What would they sign over? So your wallet could basically say, hey, I always make my auth message is revocable. I make them non-revocable. It could be a setting. We can figure out, should this be in this setting exposed to the user? Is this insecure if it's exposed to the users? Do we not want it? We could figure this out in proper time, right? We wouldn't have to make the decision now. And what that also means is that the invoker now could, on top of that, add restrictions. So basically, I could write to an invoker that says, "Hey, my signatures always have to be revocable, right? Because it can impose some validity conditions on that nonce field." So that way, basically, we could just, the protocol itself is unopinionated about it, and then it is up for the later on the community standardization process to figure out what rules we should enforce. Like, we can end up in the exact same world with invokers that enforce the exact same rules, but we don't have to make that decision once forever in protocol and enshrined and hard to change in the future. But instead, we make it on the ERC side, where we have much more flexibility.
And just to make sure I understand, so the changes that this would make to 3074 is effectively make that one field optional when you do an initial signature. And we hope that there's like a set of best practices that emerge around just like either requiring that or disclosing it pretty clearly when it's not revocable. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would, by the way, propose the same thing for the chain ID as well. Make it optional.
Got it. Dano?
So if we make the notes optional, we make eternal authorizations possible, and that's where my big concern is unrevocable eternal authorizations, because we'll always have buggy code, we'll have supply chain errors, we'll have user error. I still want some mechanism such that if there is an eternal authorization, it can be revoked in setting the nodes to 0. If there's a way to create a permanent one, that's kind of the problem. That's what I'm looking for, is some way to revoke these. And I agree with Ansgar in that putting the parameters into a smart contract and the opcode is way too early. So I don't like that proposal either.
Richard?
Yeah, just wanted to to the part what making optional means, right? Because it's interesting making a parameter optional. Here we have multiple parts in the auth call, and there's the commit part where it becomes more optional if we move it there, and which I think was the ERC part. But also here, if we want to keep still on the outside the same compatibility, where we say we would want that the account nonce could be this global revoke, then we would also need a way to access the account nonce, which is currently not possible as an opcode, right? So basically the question would be, should we then push a nonce opcode? Which again increases the complexity, or do we say everything else is just another step that potentially then, if we go the extreme argumentation route, could be bugged and not be called?
Ansgar?
Yeah, just briefly on that point though, because if you still have the option at least to enforce the nonce, then you can always basically still access your own nonce. And then for other contracts, you could basically, because you can just have arbitrary logic, right? You can basically just have, yes, they cannot currently access their own nonce, but you could just have any other replay protection mechanism instead. They can just manually write to storage and it has the same effect.
Okay, and there was a bunch more comments in the chat, but including one by Mira saying, should we have like a specific breakout room to flesh this out? I sort of am leaning towards so. It feels unlikely that we agree on the large design change to the EIP right now, and I think there are some there's a concern that if we send this back to breakout rooms, we just keep iterating on it forever and then end up not shipping something in this fork, which is not great. So the people feel like a breakout room potentially next week, and then seeing if we want to make that recurring for a while would be valuable. I think we probably want some solution or final spec for this in the next month or two, if we're gonna actually ship it in Pectra, assuming it's a relatively simple change, and overall the CIP is not a huge one, but yeah, does that make sense to people? Okay, no objections. I guess maybe if people want to coordinate in the chat here or on the Discord to find a time, yeah, I think yeah, basically discussing the topic of revocation. We didn't even get into chain ID today, but based on Ansgar's comments, maybe we can use a common mechanism for all of that. Yeah, yeah, okay. So Matt will set up a breakout room where we can discuss this further. We'll keep, I guess, maybe back to the original concern on the Nethermind side. Does it make sense to make that change with regards to delegate call for Devnet 0? My sense is no. We should just keep the spec as is for Devnet 0, and then when we have like a consensus on the updated spec, we can just move the whole thing. Does that seem reasonable to people? Okay. So yes, Ahmad, Devnet 0 has 3074, but we would not change it from the current spec. Yeah, there's a comment about like fully removing 3074 from Devnet 0. I would lean against it because it still seems like teams are in favor of doing it, and it's more a question of how rather than if. But yeah, if a month from now we realize that there is no path forward and no one is happy about it, we can always remove it then. Okay, so oh, Siri, I see you have your hands up. Is this about 3074?
Yes, the suggestion was that we would discuss the additional stakeholders who did not get a chance to voice their concerns about 3074 in general, and perhaps consensus was formed prematurely before polling in sufficient community members. So I think there are some people on the call that have concerns about 3074 being kind of bad in principle, and something that would slow us down on the path to full account abstraction. That it's essentially a kludge, that it doesn't give us things like key rotation.
I mean,
we would
yeah.
need to
Look, I think we have basically discussed this for like the past 4 months on this call, on and off. And I know there's a ton of ETH Magicians thread. I know there's other proposals. I know there's like some effectively like tech debt that we get out of this if we move to a like full, say, 4.337 world. My sense is that despite all of that, client teams still seem pretty in favor, and it does seem like the most, I don't know, the proposal with the most consensus in the short term that we could actually, improve the state of EOAs in the next fork. So I guess unless there's like something new that came up and like, yeah, I would.
The client teams shouldn't be the only ones that make this decision. This is something that affects everybody. And, we should hear from other stakeholders, unless we want to say that basically we're handing over governance to the client teams, which I don't feel is a decision we ever made explicitly. It's quite unsafe, in my opinion. So if we don't want to veer into the realm of making contentious hard forks with everything that entails, I think it would be better to try to get a feel for what other stakeholders, how they view this proposal.
I mean, I think this proposal was first brought by non-client team developers requested this for this fork, and we had a bunch of conversations about this. It's fair that like some people disagree, and look, I agree that we should, we should get broader input in that, but yeah, I'm not convinced that there's that much value in like rehashing the whole debate again. But yeah, Martin, is this?
No, I don't think it's about rehashing the arguments. I mean, some of the arguments maybe some people have not heard. It's just feeling out whether we do have consensus, because this is again something that affects everyone, and there's a trade-off here to be made between improving things on a short-term basis with something that does have potential UX improvements, but also has potential US drawbacks, depending on how you implement it. Also on other levels of the stack, like wallets, whether you're whitelisting or you're not whitelisting. So I feel like it's important for us to at least, and for the client teams, to at least understand how other parts of the ecosystem are viewing this. And if it's true that there is actually consensus, then that's one thing. But if it's just something that's convenient and easy to implement, but maybe it gets us stuck on a local maxima and delays us in getting UX improvements that are more sustainable long term, and improve the UX for everybody. Maybe that's a trade-off that we want to discuss, because ultimately this is a value judgment on what you want to prioritize. So I feel like we should at least hear other people out.
And give it a try, Tim.
Yeah, Martin, please.
Yeah, so I think, well, I have probably been one of the voices who have been critical about, or at least raised some concerns about 3074. Still, I do think progress is important, and I really don't want to stop this progress and essentially kind of try to heckle or reverse that decision. I think I would say we should go forward with 3074, but I still want to bring the perspective that it brings smart contract developers in a challenging perspective or position, because clearly we want long-term account abstraction with things that key rotation, and the question has always been, is there a path to upgrade EOAs to do that, or is a manual transition necessary? And with 3074, kind of the answer lies in between. It is partially doing this migration of EOAs, but not fully. So kind of for smart contract teams, it's just 3074 without a commitment to 5003. Puts them in a hard place. And I heard that from, obviously I talked to Safe, but also to the other smart contract teams, because, well, now it's not clear, should we try to convince users to give up their EOAs and move to a smart contract, or is there actually a path to stay on this EOA and fully upgrade it? So I would say, or my wish would be, that there is a commitment to one of those two paths. So essentially saying either, yes, we say we want to upgrade EOAs, and there will be, whether it can be directly included in this fork or in a future one, but at least there's a commitment to, let's say 5003. Well, that would be great. Or if there's a commitment, okay, this will not happen, well, then that would also be an answer, and then okay, well, then you can use 3074 at least to make it very efficient to batch or to do a large transaction and move all your funds over to a smart contract. I mean, that's also something to work with, but this uncertainty is quite challenging.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that's very fair. Like whether 3074 has a path towards full smart contract wallets, is an important question to determine. And I will say, like we did consider, 5806 early on this year and had a bunch of conversations about that. So there is a tension between like rehashing all those conversations versus moving forward with something that actually improves UX today. Ansgar?
Yeah, I just wanted to largely echo and agree with what Martin just said. I think some of the kind of the concerns here from the Codev side is more on the process side. Like we obviously debated this for quite a long time. I think a lot of the concerns came only after the decision was finally made, which of course is not how that should be. At the same time, I understand that the governance process is not, even though it's open, it's not always super legible for people who don't, as part of their full-time work, pay attention to it so actively. So I feel like it's important that we kind of find some sort of compromise here. And I think actually, because we've had precedent, right, of changes that are kind of preliminarily accepted into a fork, and then relatively close to the fork, we make a final no-go poll and potentially pull it back out, which is always not that hard to do. So I personally would propose that we basically spend the time between now and when we would have to make a final decision. The default should be that it is assumed that 3074 is in because we did accept it after all, but that basically now there's a responsibility for us to really spend the time, sketch out a concrete plan that includes like a proper kind of long-term transition path, including like, I don't think it makes sense to consider EIPs like 5003 for Pectra, but I think, for example, committing to shipping it as soon as possible afterwards or something, or some general upgrade path. So basically on that side, and then also separately, just basically having a very kind of reliable path for compatibility, even in the meantime, between 3074 and 4037 in place. And I think basically we should have the understanding that 3074 will be pulled out unless we make enough progress there that by the time we make that decision, everyone is happy about the path forward. And I feel like that seems like a reasonable compromise to me.
Modulo to everyone, I think I agree. Yeah, Vitalik?
Yeah, just like one side point in terms of this idea of agreeing on a path forward beyond Spectra. One other side of this that's worth keeping in mind is basically signaling ahead of time what kind of guarantees and invariants are going to exist versus are not going to exist. And so there's possibly value in doing some kind of signaling similar to how we deprecated self-destruct, but like, for example, deprecating the idea that if an address has no code, then it's not non-transferable, or like similar kinds of things that are used by like for either soulbound token people or other kinds of applications. Like I feel like there's like some small number of applications that rely on certain invariants that exist today that are definitely not going to exist in a smart contract world. And this is one other of those, like 2 or 3 hard forks out things that's also worth thinking about pretty far ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. Like, especially something like, you know, if we did 5003 and for whatever reason we can't include it in this fork, and that changes, you know, effectively the invariant on a on an EOA, we can then have just like an informational EIP in this fork saying like, as of Osaka, you know, you can't assume that an EOA stays an EOA. And this is also good just in terms of like, giving people time to deal with this behavior. So if, for example, we decide in like 2-3 months that we want to do 5003, and then we ship that 2-3 months after that, it feels like a really quick timeline to change, you know, something that's been a pretty strong invariant for like, over 5 years, almost 10 years at this point. So I guess clearly we're not going to come up with a final spec now. Light Client said he would organize a breakout room on this. Where should people go to just like basically help schedule the time for this breakout?
I'll post it on All Core Devs Discord.
Cool. Yeah, I think it makes sense to have it there, and I think we'll definitely open a GitHub issue norm as soon as we have like a rough time. And I think for anyone who has like a different perspective or, you know, concerns about 3074, it makes sense to bring them up there. So anything else on that EIP? Okay. Thanks everyone. I appreciate people coming and sharing their thoughts on this. And again, for DevNet 0, let's just leave it as is. And hopefully in the next month or month and a half, we can have sort of a V2 of the EIP that we can then change all at once. Next up, there were a bunch of proposals that people also wanted to get included in Pectra. I've listed a few on the agenda, but 2 more that weren't posted in the agenda, but I know we've been discussing. You're obviously EOF, and then Ethan had a bunch of SSZ related EIPs that he posted in the ETH Magicians thread. I guess given that we have already like 6 or 7 EIPs in Pectra, that client teams have not implemented those. Does any like client team feel comfortable including more stuff yet? If not, how do people think we should proceed with regards to like signaling what we might include in this fork? Do we think there's any chance we can include anything more? Yeah, how do people feel about that?
Kind of depends on what we're going to include. Like for Devnet 0, we're definitely not including anything more.
Yeah.
For Pectra, if we were to include EOF, then the fork is definitely full. If we were not to include EOF, maybe we could include something more, but even then I would be kind of against it.
Got it. Any other teams have thoughts on this?
Well, not speaking as one of the execution client teams, but there are still some potentially unresolved security concerns with regards to EIP 3074, and it is possible that they will be resolved on the devnets one way or another. But it's possible that the ones that we've kind of flagged as potential issues are not the only ones. And it's been 3 years since the last audits, and quite a few things have changed. So there's potential interactions that we may not have fully taken into account, and it seems to be a little bit safer if we do more work just to validate that this is going to be safely interacting with everything else. And yeah,
I think they're probably the best approach is one, getting to a spec that people think is reasonable. Once we have that, I think we can consider whether or not we want to have an audit. I don't want like an audit to be like a reason we just use to delay making a decision if people actually understand the risks and are comfortable with them. Not that like we should never do them, but historically there's probably like a 50-50 hit rate as to whether these are actually quite valuable and provide us new information on something, or just something we do to effectively like get more confirmation on like or at worst delay kind of the process. So I definitely wouldn't want to commit to like imposing this extra requirement on this EIP until we have one, a final spec, and two, like a reasonable concern to think that there's something about this spec that's like unique in that it requires like an audit, whereas like by default EIPs don't get a full audit before they go in. And I guess, yeah, back to like just the broader inclusion point. So there was a comment in the chat on 7212, which is like a relatively small change. And it feels like there are a bunch of relatively small changes that are being proposed. So, 5003 is one, 7623, the call data repricing is one. Are there changes that teams would like to CFI to sort of signal a short list for stuff that's being considered for Pectra? Do people want to just leave the scope as is, move forward on the implementations, and then revisit this in a few weeks? Yeah, Ahmad?
So a personal opinion is to include 7212 or a similar widely supported elliptic curve to actually improve account abstraction for the users. If we keep, like, instead of trying to say that EOA will stop account abstraction from improving, we should actually try to improve account abstraction so people actually try to move to that. And 7212 does exactly that. It improves how account abstraction could deal with the user's keys and allow things like passkeys and fingerprint authentication and our fingerprint signing, etc., biometric signing, a lot of other possibly key holding devices like YubiKey, etc. So these things, I believe that including something like that will actually do improve account abstraction in a meaningful way.
Thanks. I know Basu was like in favor of 7212, but yeah, any other thoughts from client teams on this?
Aragon is also in favor.
So,
I think the
yeah.
go ahead, Marius.
No, you can do it.
Yeah, I think one question that we had was, is R1 the right curve to be adding as a precompile? I am under the understanding that there's another curve that is starting to gain adoption and that people are migrating towards. I feel like if we're going to add a precompile, it would be better to add the precompile that people are moving towards right now rather than the precompile that's on the way down. But this is something that is like a bit outside of my expertise, so I'm not sure
Which
if anyone.
specific up and rising curve do you have in mind?
I have heard that people are looking at moving towards ED25519 as an alternative, but I don't really know like what the status of that is in hardware.
Yeah, I don't either. Like, I definitely know that 25519 is super popular in just cryptographic applications in general, just because it's a very fast curve and it has addition equations that don't have any subconditions, which makes it like simpler and side channel safer. But yeah, hardware support, it depends. Maybe we again. This gets into a bigger rabbit hole of like just how general might it make sense to make an elliptic curve precompile, but might be worth taking offline.
Ansgar, is this on the same topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly mention and just to flag for people that they're aware. So 7.2.12 happens to be the only, the first and so far only RIP that has been shipped to layer 2. So there's quite a few layer 2s already that have this live in production, which of course does not, have to force our hand at all on mainnet decisions, but at least it's something we should take into account. So keeping in sync with features that are shipped on layer 2s, I think should at least be a small reason towards doing it.
Yeah, I guess based on all this, I would lean towards just making 7212 CFI'd so we have it as like part of our short list, not committing to implement it, in the fork yet, and definitely not in DevNet 0. Yeah, anyone against that? Okay. And I guess, yeah, are there any other of the proposed EIPs that like client teams would like to sort of CFI so that we can, consider it for the next DevNets once we're a bit farther on these implementations? Yeah.
I also like 7623.
This is the call data replacing.
Yeah, it's not like it's super easy implementation, but also it makes kind of intuitive sense for me to cap the amount of call data that can be put in the block size. Right now, the maximum block size is 7.4 megabytes, right? Uncompressed, because we snappy compress it all the time. It's way less, something like 2 or 3 megabytes. But if we're when we're moving to what the peer does and putting more blobs on the chain. It's just nice insurance to have a tighter cap on the maximum size of blob that we need to send. In my opinion.
Okay. Anyone else in favor of CFIing 7623 or strongly opposed? Oh, Marek?
So I think if we ever want to raise gas limit, this EIP might be required, for example, because CL clients have 10 megabytes limit, or we have to change this limit, and the CIP will make things better here. So yeah, I think it is good EIP.
Okay. Any other thoughts on 763? Yeah, I guess it would probably make sense to CFI this one as well. I know we've been talking about it for like several calls, and people were generally supportive. But again, it's like a question of bandwidth and yeah, yeah. Richard has a question about this around data, whether data around how this would increase average gas costs. Tony had a ton of data on this. I don't know if he's on I think he's on the call, but what's the best place for people to sort of see all your analyses?
Yeah, so I put a lot of posts on ETH Research. I think there are 3 so far. And in the one that is directly about the EIP, there is also this GitHub page linked where you can input addresses or functions and check if they would be affected by the increase or not.
Nice. Yeah, if you can post this in the chat here for easy reference, that'd be great.
Yeah, I will directly look it up and post it.
And then Ansgar has a question in the chat around like if we have broad support for it, why not include it immediately? I think given like all the stuff we still have to implement, I'm cautious of like adding more things in like an ad hoc way, where if over the next like 3 calls we just add a little thing every call, we end up in a spot where like, okay, we can't actually commit to like a bigger thing to add to Pectra because we just added a bunch of small things. So I feel like it's better to sort of just identify the things we'd want to add after DevNet 0, actually get DevNet 0 done, see, how things are for something like EOF, see how things are for 3074, and then decide like, okay, do we want to add like 2 small EIPs, 1 big EIP, and have that conversation when we actually have more context. Does that make sense? Okay. Aside from these 2, 7212, 7623, anything else client teams feel strongly about?
Were we going to talk about the SS0?
I don't know if Ethan is on the call. He posted an update on ETH Magicians. I'm not sure if he could make the call to talk about them. I don't see him, but there's 100 people here, so maybe I missed him.
This is SSZ on the execution layer, right?
Yes. So I'll post his comment in the chat here. Yeah, Vitalik, did you have thoughts on them?
Let me read through the comments and come back in a minute or 2.
Cool. And yeah, worst case, we can always discuss this on the next call. Any other EIPs people feel strongly about?
I feel strongly about not including SSZ on the execution layer in Pectra. I think for that we would need to write or audit new libraries for the SSZ format. So we would think about the hashing overhead and stuff, and that would really make it hard to ship Pectra, I think. The SSZification of the execution layer should happen in a future fork.
Yeah, just to add to this, so I've been evaluating SSZ libraries after we discussed that in Taipei. And I'm talking about the Golang SSZ libraries, and there's one I still need to look at, but none of them is really workable with at the moment, which is why, if I'm correct, we decided to drop the topic for the previous fork.
Got it. Anything else on SSZ?
Yeah, I just looked at that quickly. Is there an EIP yet for SSCifying receipts? Because like I know there's been a bunch of work for transactions, right? But
I'm pretty sure there is.
Yeah,
I think it's very close to the transaction EIP.
Right. Yeah, because receipts I think are also super high value, and one of the reasons why is basically because receipts are the one place where currently we can have these like indivisible, potentially like many megabyte hashes take place, and that actually causes a whole bunch of like pain and extra security auditing overhead for rollups, which admittedly can be solved by a layer 2, but like there's basically a lot of receipt hashing applications that are needlessly 4x too inefficient at the moment that could be improved a lot. So I think there's there's significant value beyond the inherent goodness of cleanups to think about it.
Okay. One other thing I think is worth getting an update on is EOF. So I asked, I know there's a meta EIP that's in progress. I think we still need to get it merged, but yeah, I know there's been a lot of work on that in the past couple of weeks. There's been some work done into like looking at the interactions with Verkle. I don't know if someone from the EOF camp wants to give a quick update there so people can get up to speed.
Yeah, I'll take it. So yeah, we've got we're starting to write execution spec tests. We have specific facilities added in there to test EOF. Besu, EVM1, and Reth have reported they've finished their implementations. Geth is making really good progress. And the difficult parts are the parts we expect. The validation has a lot of corner cases that covers test. The tests cover very well. And the operations themselves really aren't terribly difficult. Once you get well compared to the validation, but it's achievable within a single handful of months for a single engineer. So that's Rhett's report from it. I know that Guillaume from Verkle has been speaking with Daniel from Solidity. When it comes to cutting features from EOF, my big question is we can't cut so much that Solidity and Viper won't support it in their compilers. That for me is the point where it becomes viable and non-viable. So Guillaume's working with Daniel to see what that point really is, because they're the ones most interested in reducing the scope and reducing the risk in EOF. I'm comfortable with where it's at now, but I accept that other people aren't comfortable with it. And I think that's the right approach to figure out what the customers really want out of it and what the real minimum standards are. So that's a brief update of EOF.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share thoughts or updates? Okay. Oh, Guillaume, I saw you come
Actually, sorry. Yeah, I just want to give some more details. Yeah, so it's true. I've been talking about the topic with Daniel to try to reduce the scope a little bit. It turns out that it's going to be hard to cut the scope, or at least the pushback that has been given by Ansgar especially is that yes, we could reduce the scope, but then that means the second version of EOF would have to be fairly small or fairly hard to justify by itself. And therefore, the fear, at least, I mean, Ansgar can give the argument himself, I guess, but that would mean that, if we have a reduced scope EOF, that means that's the only thing we deliver for the next 5 years, and that pretty much kills the whole point. So, we're still trying to find a sweet spot, but it's not going to be very easy to not ship all of it in one go.
Got it.
Is
Yeah.
there any way to,
Please go ahead.
sorry to jump in, but is there any way to ship like, because the problem is like we're trying to like upgrade the train while it's running, right? Is there any way to like ship experimental versions of EOF that can be iterated on that run in like a sidecar?
We discussed something like this like on L2s a few years ago, and this was before like the RIP process was a thing. I think the concerns from then were one, there's probably some of the like EOF work that we want L1 client teams and testing teams and security teams to actually, thoroughly review. And so like, there's like a significant part that it makes sense for L1 to own. Two is basically L2's shipping and deprecating a version of EOF leaves them with like the depth forever, and that's not something they were super keen on. And then three is like if we have something like DevNets or whatnot, then it's kind of hard to get enough support from like tooling and languages and whatnot. So like sure, we could launch like an EOF v1.5 DevNet, but like will Solidity and Viper and all that support it? That seems unlikely.
What if it's like neither? What if it's like in L2 that some set of responsible parties set up that is kind of like a DevNet in that it's supposed to be torn down at some time, but it's also not mainnet.
So the risk is like either that chain has no value or it has value. If it has no value, the incentive for tooling to support it feels very low. Maybe that's changed. Like maybe there's more tooling providers today. But if there's value, it's like people's ETH can get stuck. Yeah.
Why couldn't it have value?
Right. So so if you have value on it, and then you have a deprecated version of EOF or like a conflicting version of EOF and stuff like that, like you end up in this case where you have actual funds that are stuck potentially in something. And I don't think anyone just wanted to take on that like complexity.
I mean, I think the issue that I've seen repeatedly in discussions about EOF is that, it's like not perfect, which I actually agree. And if the bar is that we need some system that is perfect, or at least like very long term, like the nature of these things is that sometimes you don't actually know until they're in production. So I don't know if the bar, the this must be perfect before you ship it bar is very realistic.
Got it. Let's do Guillaume.
Yeah, so just to give some share more information from my talk with Daniel and try to answer some of those concerns. Basically, the compilers, what they want to, there's an EOF version that's not the compilers support EOF, but they support the former version. And in order to keep maintaining this, to be able to produce testnets and try to do some testing. And by the way, this is a problem we have for Verkle too, because we would like to understand how Verkle and EOF interact, but there's no way to test this at this time. I think what the compilers want is to have EOF scheduled. So I think we should schedule it for sure. I don't think it will come to anybody as a surprise that I think we should schedule for Amsterdam. But in any case, compilers, if you want EOF to make progress on the tooling so that you can actually test it, you need to schedule it. That has been made very clear by compiler people.
Yeah, I'm pretty aware of what compilers want. So I think that, yeah, if we can have some kind of middle ground, it might be very helpful for everybody who's working on it.
Yeah, I know that, yeah, Ansgar and Vitalik have like a thread in the chat about potentially a simplified version. Yeah, either of you want to give some context on that?
Yeah, I think the idea was just to say that there's two different types of small EOF we could ship. There's a small EOF that would basically be incompatible with the big EOF, and so it would require us to then ship a separate version of EOF later on if we wanted to all the features of big EOF. And that has the downside that then forever and ever now layer 1 has to support basically raw contracts, UFV1 and UFV2, and because all of them exist. Whereas if we can basically slim down the scope of EOF by just removing features that can be later on added to the existing version without breaking things. And that, like, for example, right, we could initially just not ship a specific opcode, and then we later on add the opcode. That usually does not require a new version bump. That makes much more sense, because then we can ship small EOF now, and still by later on adding the remaining features, we would not need a new version. So that variant of small EOF I think is promising.
But is it so easy to add a new opcode to EOF? Because you need to make sure that.
Yeah, you just add a new opcode the same way we add new opcodes today, right?
And EOF
right, and because
also
we
has
have validation.
Yeah,
because we have validation, we have greater security that space is there and unused. We won't run into nasty side effects like when we're trying to add relative jumps into the legacy code. That, by the way, you could put jump test in a push 0 and in a push 32, and things suddenly change.
You do need a version bump, because otherwise it won't pass validation.
It'll pass multiple levels of validation. You don't have to encode the version in the byte stream, but you would have different versions of validation.
Maris?
At least for us, complexity-wise, it would basically mean version, because you would have to write new validation that are basically copying most of the validation algorithm, and that adds code to that.
Right, but there's a difference.
I don't know. It can be.
Oh, sorry, you sort of broke up.
Yeah, it's not a version bump, but it wouldn't be a version bump. It would make the complexity. It would be similar complexity, at least in our implementation.
Got it. Ansgar?
Yeah, I feel like you were also starting to say this, but I would just want to point out that there is still a difference in the complexity, because it might be the same complexity for like implementing and adding these extra features later on, but in terms of long-term support, right? If you think 10 years from now, in one world, the client needs to support 3 different types of bytecode that it could encounter in the VM, and in the other version, it only needs to support 2 different types of bytecodes. And because the validation on deployment rules you only have to do if you replay the old history. And I think there are all these ideas already that clients in the future might not be just out of the box support replaying the entire history, and you might need to have like older versions of the clients for that and everything. It basically means in one world you can slim down the rules and forget about these old rules, and the other version you have to support them forever. So I do think it still makes a big difference.
Got it. I guess, yeah, this also feels like something we're obviously not going to fully specify on this call. There are bi-weekly, if not weekly, EOF calls. So I think it probably makes sense to continue the conversation there. And then again, as we get ready to consider stuff to add the Pectra beyond what's already there, yeah, hopefully we can make some progress on all those issues for EOF. Yeah, any final comments, questions, concerns about EOF?
Going back to this sidecar thing that I'm hung up on, I don't know. I think that L2s might be interested in doing it if there was a guarantee that under certain conditions it would be merged into mainnet. Because I think the issue is like nobody wants to be left holding the bag, right? Mainnet doesn't want to implement it and then have to like change it later. L2 doesn't want to implement it and then like just have it be turned into a, abandoned or whatever. So if there were some way, and maybe this is going to be important like going in the future because of what is it called, like L1 ossification. So I think if there's some way to like kind of increasingly escalate the stakes involved with it instead of it being like all of a sudden all or nothing, maybe that's another way to do it.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, that is the last thing we had on the agenda. So let's do the comments by Epsilon, and then we can move over to that general topic around like L1 and L2 governance and feature deployment. Yeah, Epsilon.
Yeah, maybe this wasn't made clear in today's updates. But on yesterday's EOF call, we did mostly agree to simplify the creation question. And so in the chat, there were some discussions about EOF create and TX create. EOF create is for creating new contracts within an existing contract, so like factory contracts. And TX create is the external transaction creation process. The TX create is the more complicated one. And we agreed to go with like a legacy approach, which we don't think is the final ideal case. But the design we have is actually forward compatible. It doesn't require a new transaction type. It doesn't require a lot of complexity. It is rather simple, but it's forward compatible with introducing TX create and a specific transaction type in the future. And I think this was the most contentious item in terms of complexity, and it seems we have removed this. So I think we would be curious to learn maybe on the next EOF call, which is every Wednesday. We would be curious to learn what other blocking complexity exists.
Thanks. Okay. So can someone post the agenda to the next EOF call in the chat here or on the Alcor Devs Discord so people can know where to go for those? Okay, last topic on the agenda. So we've covered this a bunch of times, sort of indirectly today. But L1 versus L2 processes. I guess the question is around how should we think about Ethereum L1's roadmap, given that we want rollups to play a larger and larger role. Can rollups actually ship stuff before? What's like the process we can use for something like that? And it might make sense for Carl and or Ansgar to start by sharing their thoughts on that, given they've been running the roll calls for the past couple months. And yeah, we can take it from there.
Yeah, I can. I don't know whether Carl also. I can briefly say something. So basically, we've had the kind of the roll call as like a bit kind of an experimental forum for a while now, for half a year, a bit over half a year already, and the kind of accompanying RIP process. The way to think about it really is to. I think there are basically three different dimensions here. There's the research side, there's the governance side, and then the client implementation side. So on the research side, I think we still have an open question of long term, do we want to stick with EVM equivalents or not? there have been like a lot of kind of arguments on both sides of this front, but a lot of it hinges on this question. So basically, there are all these ideas like in the future we could have an enshrined ZK EVM on mainnet, and then you could have basically enshrined rollups that natively are verified and everything. All of this only works if you have fully equivalent layer 2s that follow the exact same rules as layer 1. In that scenario, we don't really have to talk about this topic much. Then we maybe should just talk about how can we have layer 2s be more present on all core devs so that we can maybe govern the EVM together more kind of effectively. But if, of course, we decide that it's fine that if layer 2s over time depart from mainnet EVM more and more, then the question instead becomes how can we basically enable them to do that more. And there specifically, it's like governance and the client side. And so basically on the governance side, I think it's more the question about layer 2s in the past have been very reluctant to ship features where they basically have the worry that mainnet might either never ship them, which is still kind of fine, or ship them in a slightly different and incompatible way. I think this is usually what they're the most afraid of, right? Because then that kind of bifurcates the ecosystem a lot. And I feel like for that, we really over time need to just make a decision on layer 1 to what extent we are willing to take this into account in our decision making. Of course, layer 2s often make decisions before layer 1 makes them. So to what extent are we willing to basically be bound by layer 2 decisions? The nice thing is that with the R1 precompile, we have the first candidate where we can just very practically debate all of this. So if, say, next call, we want to talk about whether to include the R1 precompile or not, we have a lot of these practical questions to answer. The layer 2s have already shipped it. We've given them a separate, if you remember this from a couple months ago, we've given them a separate precompile range. So now layer 2s have shipped the R1 precompile at a layer 2 specific address. Do we want to take over that address? Do we want to not take over that address? Would we even want to maybe say modify the opcode, the precompile behavior, or are we willing to say no, it's finalized on layer 2s? We're also going to take it as is and basically ship the same version. So I think basically just going through this exercise of figuring out to what extent we are willing to basically be somewhat bound by layer 2 governance on the layer 1 side, I think would be very helpful for guiding layer 2s. And then the third one is that's also a really interesting one. So far, even though there has been some interest for layer 2s to basically start diverging more, the main worry they have is that a lot of layer 2s, of course, also run layer 1 clients out of the box as clients for their own chains as well. The client developers here is so far EL client developers mostly have focused on the L1 feature set. And so the question is, how can we start enabling chains that don't quite follow the layer 1 feature set, just basically have to still use these same clients more. So I think in the past there's been quite a bit of debate. Like some clients are more open to also like say supporting layer 2 specific features out of the box. So for example, implementing and supporting IPs. I know, for example, from Geth that there's a bit more skepticism and hesitation about supporting features that are not actually intended for mainnet. If that's not the right path, we could also like talk about more standards for extensibility of clients. But basically, we need to find a path forward where actually practically in software, in client software, these features can be supported. Otherwise, it's just a non-starter. So basically, I think so far our lessons from 6 months of roll call, these are the 3 topics: research, do you want to diverge from EVM equivalence, governance, how does layer 1 interact with the decisions layer 2 makes on EVM changes, and then on the client side, if layer 2s want to actually ship features beyond layer 1, how does that actually then end up in code? I don't know, Carl, do you have anything? Does it match your impression?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of where we are.
Thanks. Yeah, that was great. Peter.
So one thing I wanted to react to was basically how we should approach when layer 2s ship certain features and whether we should pick those features up or not. I think there's I wouldn't necessarily call it dangerous precedent, but there's an interesting thing there that if we commit to layer 2s introducing something and then we'll just pick whatever they introduced, I think we kind of run the risk of layer 2s just YOLOing in certain things which they want, and then they can just point to it. Basically, one of the dangers is that we kind of that feature that they ship might be appropriate for them, but might be not completely appropriate in general for everybody. And then the question is, well, since some big important layer 2 shipped it, are we going to basically have everybody use something that's not really appropriate for them just because, I don't know, optimism rolled with it first? The other problem that I see is what happens, for example, with precompilers. Well, what happens if you have two layer 2s which use the same address for different precompiles? I mean, how do you solve that? Because then you cannot actually follow what layer 2s are doing. And thirdly, I think it kind of I'm not entirely sure we want to end up in a place where basic layer 2s get to dictate that, well, we shipped it, it works, so you have to roll with it. So I think it's because of these things, I think I would be kind of cautious against going down the path of saying that, well, layer 2x shipped it, so we should ship it.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone proposed that specifically, but I agree this would be like a huge risk. Yeah, sorry,
I
Carl?
agree it's a huge risk, but I also don't think it's anything anyone's trying to do. I don't think the layer 2s are trying to ship some weird feature that no one's going to want or whatever, and there's no proposal that whatever ships on layer 2 has to be shipped on layer 1. I don't think that's a realistic concern yet. And I think we'd have to address if we ever got there. I don't think this is a way of layer 2s like co-opting and like trying to take over layer 1 governance. I think this is just layer 2s trying to have some of their own sensible standards for this happening. And then to your second point about shipping precompiles at the same address, that's like one of the things we want to help prevent with RIPs and roll call is like how do we prevent these kinds of things from happening, because that would suck for everyone involved. And so it's like part of what RIPs are trying to achieve.
So I definitely agree that I don't think there's a danger of layer 2s necessarily wanting to co-opt layer 1 governance or do anything super mean. And obviously, if they were to deploy something wonky, then obviously there would be not even a guarantee layer 1 wouldn't follow them. I think the dangers are at least the things that I see as potential problems are more in the nuances, in the details. When as a layer 2, the idea, the reason why people like layer 2s is because layer 2s can experiment. They can really go very fast, and they can, I wouldn't say break things, but the guarantees are a bit different. But this kind of also means that layer 2s will probably, but once they have a solution for their problem, they're going to roll with it. They will not wait for 100 people to agree whether that solution is the perfect or not for everybody. They will just go with the perfect solution for their specific problem. And I think that's the nastier corner case where, for example, you have Optimism who ships a solution for some quirky problem which isn't perfectly optimal for everybody else. But then, okay, what do you do? So that's the issue. And I think layer 2s will be actually incentivized to just roll whatever they want with the nuances they want, and then just say that, well, we can't really change it, so you just have to roll with it.
I think my bigger concern is what happens if rollups just die and walk away, and we have to keep maintaining the feature because they once needed it, but now they've either completely vanished or they have changed their stack to use some different proving mechanism or whatever. And there's a lot of precedent for this, where like people came and proposed features and precompiles for exactly their use case, and then their use case didn't really work out, or they completely died, or they moved on to the next thing, and we are stuck maintaining the BN curves stuff, so or Lake to be, and so yeah, I wouldn't like to be in this situation again.
Thanks. We're already a bit past time, so let's do Pooja and Ansgar and then wrap up.
Thank you, Tim. I know this is not the best place to discuss the process part, but I'm thankful to Ansgar that he brought up the significant element, which is governance here. I'm really interested to understand a little bit more about it. Maybe in short of time, we may not be able to do it here right now, but it would be very interesting to learn about how do we want to see it. I want to congratulate Proposal 7212 to be considered for inclusion being CFI'd, but it is RIP. And we are like, when we talk about upgrade, we talk about EIP. So there are some details which we may want to iron out. I'll be happy to hear the venue where we can perhaps discuss it with the roll-up teams. Generally for EIPs, we discuss it in EIP meeting, but is it something that we should be joining RIP calls? Yeah.
I don't know that we have a great answer right now beyond like ACD and RIP calls. Yeah. But yeah, I guess we can discuss this async more. Ansgar?
Yeah, I just want to briefly respond to what Peter said, and I just want to say because I think the impression has always been that layer 2s can just experiment and go more wild. I think in practice what we've seen is that most of them decided to not do this, or at least maybe started doing this, and then over time have mostly stopped. So now they're really following mostly layer 1 specs. And I think at least given that, like the rollup centric roadmap was something where we kind of all decided this is the best way for the Ethereum ecosystem to go, I think we at least owe layer 2's clear communication about clear guidance and communication about like the best path forward here. Like I don't think we necessarily have to be willing to say constrain our own decision set or anything. It's more about clearly saying, hey, if you want to over time deviate from layer 1 features, these are the ways in which you can do it. These are the ways that you won't be able to do it. For example, maybe it means you'll have to completely fork away and you have to write your own client, maintain your own client, you have to maintain your own, basically, now virtual machine and everything. I just feel like in the past, this has not been very relevant because layer 2s have been mostly focused on just getting the basic roll-up stuff ready, like the fork proofs and basically like just learning how to walk. But now that layer 2s are mature, they are starting to be more ambitious beyond the constraints of layer 1 in terms of throughput, in terms of additional features. So these topics, these questions become more urgent. And I do think basically we owe them some guidance. So I don't have any specific proposals or anything. I just think it's important that we have these conversations and that we figure out a path forward. And just saying they should just keep experimenting is not the right approach because right now they're basically not able to experiment because they don't see a way to do it. So I think at least making it clear from our side what the scope would be or what the design space would be for them to operate in, I think is very important.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can wrap up here. Yeah, there's a lot of threads to follow up on async. But yeah, already a bit over time. Any final comments or things people think we should address? Okay, sweet. Well, yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, I'll post a recap about all this on the R&D Discord, and there's already a poll up for the time for the account abstraction 3074 breakout room. Yeah, talk to y'all soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.